All right, just to recap what I was talking about in this PowerPoint, use the PowerPoint to study for the exam. Everything is included in here. It is organized by topic and not chronologically, meaning that if we talked about strings in week 1, 3, and 7, it is just under the string section. So you can learn everything you need. All right. Big things to know for the midterm review. If you see this bold, underline, or even italicized, there's a reason I did that. All right. So if I say, give me the name of the function, and the name of the function is bold or underline, I just need the name of the function. So what's the name of the function we use to send something to the screen so the user can read it? Print, right? You don't need to put print with a bunch of extra stuff in there. It just asks for the function name, and that'll be bold or italicized when I ask that question. All right. Format, there's only 20 questions. All right. This isn't a 100-question midterm. It's 20 questions. You have about an hour to complete it, and the test itself will auto-submit all the answered questions if you run out of time. Those of you that have sent me pamphlets that say you need 1.5 times the time, things like that, remind me, and I'll make sure that I've adjusted that schedule. So if you have stuff from the Kelly Center or whatever it is, just remind me of those. This is the only one that's really timed. I don't mind giving the extra time if you guys got that list. The only reason it's timed here is so that you guys aren't spinning forever on it. All right. You should be able to answer these 20 questions in the 1 hour. With that being said, it's open book, open note. All right. So you can use this PowerPoint while you're taking the exam. That's fine. The key here is you have 1 hour to do it. So you should know how it works, because just having the PowerPoint isn't going to get you everything, right? Each question is presented one at a time, and once it's answered, you can't return back to the old one. All right. This is different than all the quizzes and everything you've taken so far in this class. One question at a time. Once you answer, you can't go back. But open book, open note. Okay. Types of questions are fill in the blank. For that, you want to pay attention to the format I request. All right. Again, I tell you exactly how to answer it. If answered in a format other than requested, on those particular ones, fill in the blank, partial points will not be awarded. Okay. No partial points on that one. For multiple choice, multiple answer does have partial points available. True and false, matching has partial points available. So when I'm asking you to fill in a blank, there's a very specific way I'm wanting you to answer. If you got half of it, that doesn't mean it's correct. And there's one of those I'll point out that everybody messes up, kind of thing. All right. Because if you don't have all of it and I try it in Python, it doesn't execute. Therefore, it doesn't matter. So the answers and everything that I test, particularly the fill in the blank, if I can build out a Google sheet and I copy and paste what you put in and it gets the output, fine. If it's not the right output, then it doesn't count. Does that make sense? All right. Again, I'll point out some examples of that. Okay. Anybody got any questions about the exam before I dive in? So it'll take us about 30 minutes today to go through the PowerPoint, get you guys up to speed. If you have questions, and we can ask after that. All right. So the first thing we ever talked about was expressions. Expressions are the most basic form of a programming instruction. They consist of values and operators. So something like 2 plus 2. 2 are the values. The plus sign is the operator. Those will always, quote, evaluate or reduce down to a single value, in this case, 4, right? A single value has no operators and is considered an expression, evaluating only to itself. A condition is an expression just more specific to flow control statements. So a expression always evaluates down to either Boolean, true, or false, right? We use them on if statements to figure out if something matches. If it's true, then do this. If not, do that. Okay. The word variables. Variables were storage of any value of a specific data type, right? Assignment operators are a single equal sign, right? So if we say spam is equal to 42, spam is assigned the integer value of 42 and can use spam in the code anywhere where you wanted to use the 42 value. All right. Variable names are case sensitive. So lowercase spam, uppercase spam, capital S on spam, camel case, all of those are different variable names. Okay. Case sensitive matters. Remember that in your answers when you're on the midterm exam. Make sure you have the right case sensitivity. If it's not right, even though I know what you meant, it doesn't matter because in Python, it is case sensitive. Therefore, your answers have to be case sensitive. All right. Variable names should have some kind of meaningful value to them. Variable names should be defined as either global or local. Remember, we'll talk about scopes here a little bit in the function section. All right. Variable names. They can only be one word, meaning no space between the words. They can only use letters, numbers, and the underscore character, and it cannot begin with a number. So remember this chart or this table over here on the right-hand side. This gives you what are valid. This gives you what's invalid. All right, I'll pause there. Does anybody have any questions on the concept of variables? Okay. All right, you'll notice over here on the left, when I have these PowerPoints, they're broke up by sections. That's not by accident. Control F. Does anybody know what that does in PowerPoint? You can search, right? Might be helpful to you if you're going through here trying to study or trying to figure out stuff. All right. The next section we'll talk about is data types and all the different data types we've covered so far. So this is a category for a given value. Every value belongs to exactly one data type. We have mutable and we have immutable data types. Remember that mutable data types have values that can be added, changed, removed, etc. Immutable means that it cannot be changed. Mute being mutation, change, right? Anybody got any questions on mutable and immutable? All right, we'll talk about which ones can. So these are all the data types that you guys have learned so far this year. You have our standard three, the integer, the floating point, and the string. All of those are immutable. Those are the examples off there to the right. Booleans are immutable. They're either true or false. We have a non-type variable, which is just none. Okay. We have lists. Lists are mutable. And you can see an example of a list over there to the right, which holds other data types. Tuples are immutable. They do not change. They use the parentheses instead of square brackets. Dictionaries are mutable. We can see what a dictionary looks like using the curly braces. And then you have dict keys, dict values, and dict items. Remember that dict keys, dict values, and dict items, those are not lists. They just look like lists. Okay. Anybody got any questions on those data types? Okay. Don't be afraid to ask questions today because it's the only day I can help you before the exam. All right. Boolean values. Boolean values are a data type that only has two values, either true or false, right? They must be capitalized, meaning that this one does have to have a capital T or a capital F. They can be assigned to a variable or they can be the result of expressions. Non-type ones must be capitalized with a capital N. It's just a value of N. It's a value without having any value. So if you want to create a variable name but not really put anything in it for now, just as a placeholder, you can give it none for now. All right. That takes us to strings, and we covered a lot of things on strings. So strings are of data type. You can always surround your string with either single quotes or double quotes, right? To create a blank string, you can use something like spam equals and then just two single quotes, and that will create a blank string. If you want to put strings together, we use string concatenation. That uses the plus sign. If we want to do string replication, where we repeat that strings or repeat that string, we can use the asterisk or the multiplication operator in order to do that. Strings are considered the universal data type. Notice the bold and underline there. And you can always convert those to integers and floats into strings, but you cannot always convert strings to integers and floats. Right? Strings themselves are immutable. We cannot change a string. Meaning if I have spam equals with Jason in single quotes, I then change that to spam equals Caden in single quotes. I did not change that variable name. I completely reassigned it. That makes sense? All right. So we talked about string concatenation, real simple, adding two strings together. You cannot mix data types, so we can't say something like Alice as a string plus 5. It will not add that. String replication is where we multiply by an integer. So Alice by 5 gives us 5 Alices all the way across. All right. We cannot mix data types here, so we can't say Alice times Bob or Alice times 5.0. That's a floating point. Okay. Strings are immutable, but you can mutate a string by slicing it, concatenating it, and building a new string. So it's not really mutable. It just means that we can do some manipulation, but we got to do some work. So for example, if we have the string Sophie a cat, then we can add in or take a slice of the first 7 characters, then take add the string then take the remaining characters. That makes Sophie a cat to Sophie the cat. All right. In other words, we had this new variable name called new name. We sliced the characters that we wanted out of here. We added then we sliced the remaining characters. Notice we didn't change the original phrase. This is a new one here. All right. Double quotes. Double quotes allow us to have strings that have single quotes inside of them, aka apostrophe. It's also common with strings that have contractions. So we have something like this is Alice's cat. This will error. If we have double quotes on the outside, that'll work just fine. Which brings us to escape characters. So escape characters are where you want to otherwise put different strings inside. Remember the main ones. So you have the escape character single quote, ignores the single quote. This one ignores a double quote. And then the special one, /T is a tab, /N is a new line, and a double slash just means that you are escaping that backslash that was in the line. Anybody got any questions so far? Okay. Multi-line, remember that you can use /N to escape a new character or put a new line into a string. It's often easier to just write it out as a multi-line string. So anything inside triple single quotes does not need to be escaped. So for example, dear Alice, Eve's cat is missing, sincerely Bob. We don't have to escape this single quote, and it will keep this format of these enters and blank spaces inside of there. That works by having triple single quotes over here. Okay. Then we talked about a whole slew of methods that went on a string. So .upper is going to return everything as all uppercase, regardless of what that is. All right. .lower moves it all to lowercase. IsUpper is going to be used for a check to see if everybody typed something in that was all uppercase. Or IsLower is all lowercase. IsAlpha and IsAlphaNum allows us to do some check there. IsAlpha just make sure that you're giving us back letters, not numbers, but just letters. AlphaNum allows it to be either letters or numbers. If we want just numbers, we use IsDecimal. IsSpace is going to look for white space characters, and IsTitle is where we want the first case or the first character to be uppercase, all the other ones to be lowercase. So we use IsTitle for what? Names, right? All right. You can use starts with, which is going to test to see if something starts with whatever you want it to see if it matches. You can use ends with on that. Join is going to allow you to take a list of strings and join them together by whatever character you want. All right. Split is going to split on whatever character inside of a string that you want to separate it by. All right, these you guys want to make sure you pay attention to. RJust is going to add white space to the left, right? LeftJust is going to add space to the right. All right. Center is going to add space where? Both sides evenly, unless the total number of characters that you told it to space it on is not even as a number, then it's going to do what? Put more on the right, typically. Okay. So if I want to center a particular string by 20 characters, what's the first thing I got to do? We would want to count how many characters are in the original string, right? So what if there's 24 characters in the original string. What will center by 20 do? Nothing, right? You got to make sure that the total value that you want to div it to is longer than the string. If I say the total value of the characters is 15, right? And I have a total width of 20, that's going to add how many spaces on the left? And how many on the right? 3, right? Okay. Pay attention to this guy down here at the bottom. Practice it. All right, you also have strip. Strip is going to remove all the white spaces leading and after. Okay. So if you have a string and it has white space in front and white space at the end, strips all the white space off. L strip is going to take everything off the left. R strip is going to take everything off the right. Okay. And right now, by default, it does white space unless you fill in this chars and you tell it to remove specific characters off the front or off the back, whichever one you want it to do. All right, so here's some examples of how all those work. Here is a variable called spam with a value of a string called hello world. If we want to convert that all to uppercase, we can say spam equals spam.upper. That converts everything to uppercase. If we then say spam equals spam.lower, it converts spam to all lowercase. All right, pretty simple. Oops, I scrolled too fast there. All right, anybody got any questions on strings? Again, you guys online are more than welcome to type something in chat or come off mute, either way. Okay. Tuples. Tuples are much like lists and they have an ordered sequence. However, tuples use parentheses and they are immutable, meaning that we cannot modify, add, remove anything from a tuple. Once we create it, that's what it is. So they're very similar to a list type other than they can't be changed. All right, so an example down below, spam equals parentheses hello 42 1.5. We can then test spam and see that we get that back. Tuples are often used to convey information that we don't want to change variables on. So this would be like system settings or configuration settings, things like that inside our program that don't necessarily change once it executes. All right. Tuples themselves have optimizations because we're not being able to add or remove things from them. So they are technically slightly faster than using lists. Might be a question. Okay. Lists themselves are considered to be an ordered sequence, right? We have an index. It starts with 0 and then moves its own way all the way up. Okay. A list value refers to the list itself and not the values inside. A list can be stored in a variable and passed into a function just like any other value that's out there. The values that are inside of a list are called items. All right. Those items are values and they can be any other data type. Could be another list. It could be a string, an integer, a whole dictionary, anything. All of those items are separated by commas inside of a list. And you can use the len function in order to calculate the number of values that are in that list. All right. Lists are mutable, meaning that we can change it. We can add, remove, subtract, whatever we want to do. All right. We got a list example here. We have my cat equals square brackets, fat gray lab. Okay. Each one of those has its index. Like you guys said, it starts at 0. So spam 0 in this list is cat, right? If a list contains other values, you would use multiple indexes, meaning if we look at spam equals, then we have an outer list, which has 2 inner lists inside of it. If I wanted to get back bat, I would have to say it's the 0 index first, and then of that inner list, it would be the 1 index, which means it looks like this if we want to get bat back. Everybody got that one? Okay. If you want to call something from the end, you can use negative indexes. That would allow you to get the last one in the list, which is, and what is that index? 2. -1, right? All right. Slices allow you to return values back from inside of a list and they form a new list. So if I only want from index 2 to index 5, I want to return those back to me, I would put what? 2 colon. I want to get back indexes from 2 to 5. I need to put what inside those square brackets? 2 colon 6, right? Because it goes up to, but does not include the one that we put there. All right. So remember that big bold here. It goes up to, but does not include when we do slices. You can leave out either side of that index. So instead of saying 2 colon whatever, say it started at 0, I could just say colon 2 or something colon 0, which means it would go all the way to the end. All right. So to change values inside of a list, you use an assignment statement to set up a list. So spam equals, here's our list. If I say spam1 equals aardvark, we now changed what? Bat to aardvark, right? So that is how you can change it. We can do list concatenation, just like we did with strings, adding 2 lists together. We can do list replication, just like that, putting the 2. We use the delete statement when we know what index we want to delete, and it's the actual value. All right. So if we wanted to delete cat, we would say delete spam1, and that would remove cat from that list. Okay. We use for loops in order to iterate over lists. So if we want to go through a list, we use a for loop. And those can be used in combinations with the range command or the len function in order to go through it X amount of times. All right. When we use the range command, the first part of it is where we start, right? The second number is where we think about the range command, right? The second number goes up to and includes or does not include. It includes on the range command. What's the third variable inside of a range command mean? How to step. All right. And we'll talk more about that, but just know that part. All right. Remember the multiple assignment trick. And this is one you guys will need to know. It's one of the most common missed ones on the midterm. All right. If I have a list where cat equals fat, orange, loud, fat equals what? 0. So I could say size equals this. That would get me back fat. Color 1 would be orange and disposition 2 would be loud. So I wanted these variable names, size, color, and disposition, to refer to those 3 variables that are items inside that list, right? You could use multiple assignment where it would say size, comma, color, comma, disposition equals cat. Then these variable names are automatically assigned in that order. If I mix these up, does that change what this looks like down here? Yes, right? So if I did 0, 1, 2 here, if I listed 2, 0, 1, it doesn't matter what this looks like down here because those still correlate to what's up here. That make sense? The order that you do them here is the order of what it's going to be assigned out of that list. That's all that matters. So it's not really a trick question on the exam. It's that you got to pay attention to the indexes as they go out. So write that in your notes, whatever. But when you come across that one, just remember to pay attention to the order of the indexes. Chronic students are texting me about the exam. Okay. What else we got here? Method. All right. So with methods, we can use .index and then pass it a value. It would return back the value if we know what index we want, right? We have .append if we want to add something to the end of a list. .insert requires 2 options. We have to pass it which index we want to insert it in and the value that we want to insert. .remove is going to remove whatever value we pass it. So delete and remove kind of do the same thing, but you use delete when you know the index number. You use remove when you know the value of the index that you want to remove. All right. The sort function When we use sort, we can only sort numbers or strings. We cannot have a mix of the two together inside that list. All right. If we use reverse, by default, that's set to false. You can pass reverse equals true, and it will give us the opposite order of what's inside there. Sort uses alphabetical, which means it'll use uppercase characters before it gives you the lowercase characters. All right, so here's examples of all those we just talked about. If I have this list and I use dot index of hello, it's going to return me 0, right? 0 is the index of hello. If I say append hola, it's going to add hola at the very end of the list. If I want to insert sup at a certain place, in this case, the one index, it's going to insert it right after hello and shift all the other ones down. If I use remove for hello, I pass in whatever variable I want to remove. It's hello, it drops out of there. And if I do dot sort, it's going to sort it in alphabetical order. Okay. Let's see here. That all looks good. Just remember, tuples use parentheses, lists use square brackets. All right. Anybody got any questions on lists?
You would just want the user to add it to like X1 who the student put, or I guess for me, why would you do spam dot insert one sub? I mean, why wouldn't you just add it to the list itself when you're putting?
This is later on. So say you have a list, like you're building names. Your program starts with an empty list and we add all the names of the students through a while loop input, right?
Yeah.
You would have them gather the name of the user, then we would append it to the end of the list. However, if we specifically wanted you to be at the start of the list, we would have to tell it which index we wanted to start it at. So 0 at that case. We would say 0 cadence if we wanted to move you to the front.
And so you could do that anywhere.
Exactly, anywhere in the list. Yep. Insert is when you want to specifically put them at a certain spot in the list. In this case, maybe you haven't sorted or you just need to resort afterwards or something. Good question. Okay. I know this is a bit dry, but I want to make sure I cover it so you guys are going down the exams. So dictionaries. Dictionaries are a value type that contains an unordered sequence, right? We no longer have indexes per se with numbers. We have indexes that are called keys. And so we can give value to those keys that have better meaning. So a key is always associated with a value, and this is called a key value pair. A dictionary is usually typed out with braces or the curly brackets. So here's an example of a dictionary. I have a my cat equals, I have an index of size, an index of color, and an index of disposition. The values are fat, gray, and loud. Right? In this case, when I say indexes, when we talk about dictionaries, they're called keys, right? So the keys are going to be size, color, disposition. If I want to get back a value, I give me the name of the actual dictionary, in this case, my cat, and then the value or the key that I want to return. So if I ask for its size, it returns me back fat. All right. The items in this case, if we use dot items, it would be size and fat, color and grade, disposition and loud. This should be a lowercase d for disposition. All right. Again, keys are these are the values. All right. There are some methods with dictionaries, and there's only 3. We have keys, which returns a list-like object of all the dictionary's keys. Values, which returns all the values, and items, which returns a list like of tuples of those individual items. All right. Always use a for loop, and you can use the multiple assignment trick to say key. So you would say for k comma v in my dictionary dot items. That would return k and v, where k is the key, v is the value for every time you loop through it. All right. You can use .get if you want to get a value out of a dictionary. If it doesn't work or it doesn't exist, you can tell it to give you some default. All right. Set default will check to see if a key exists, and if it doesn't exist, return that. All right. You do not, when you answer for these, if I ask you about get or set default, don't include this stuff here, right? This is just me telling you that this is what you would pass in. So if I said which one of these two methods would return a result if it has it, and if it doesn't, it actually sets it in the dictionary. Which one of these two methods would it be? Yep. So if I say which of these two methods would allow me to check to see if a key exists, and if it doesn't, it actually sets it in the dictionary. Set default. And you would just answer set default with 2 parentheses. Because the question would be which method allows you to do it. So you don't have to answer something dot set default. You just answer set default with 2 parentheses. That all make sense? Okay. So here's your dictionaries. Here's what they look like. If I had this dictionary here about Zophie, if I say dot keys, I can check to see if a key is in there. In this case, we have name and age. If I say name and keys, it would return true. I could see if Zophie is in the values, which it is. And if it's not in there, I could test that as well. Anybody got any questions about dictionaries? All good? You're all experts? I like it. All right. Operators. You guys should all know these from high school. You have the orders of operations, right? You got precedence, another word for it. This just means that we do exponents before we do multiplication, division, modulus, addition, and then subtraction, right? This is the order in which we would evaluate this down. We also have comparison operators. A double equal sign is equal to, exclamation point equal sign equals not equal to, greater than, less than or greater than, or I'm sorry, less than or equal to, and greater than or equal to. All right. Note that double equal sign and a pound or a dollar exclamation point equal sign can be used on any data type, meaning is this equal to this or is it not equal to this, right? But I can't do greater than, less than, greater than or equal to on integers, or I can only do them on integers and floats. Can't do it on a string. Is the string Jason greater than the string Caden, right? Yes, but no. We can't test for that. Boolean operators, that was our and, or not. So this allows us to test 2 different conditions at once. So we could say, is this condition and this condition matched? Or is this condition and or this condition matched? Or we can say if it's not this condition, then we can go for it, right? That was a joke, by the way. Yeah. Don't get hung up on that, man. All right. Boolean truth tables. We have our and operator. So if it's true and it's true, it's true. If it's true and it's false, false and true, it's false, false. All right. Ors are the opposite of that, and not is just the opposite of that. So if it's not true, it's false, right? Pretty simple. All right. Make sure you guys remember the difference between a double equal sign and an equal sign, right? Double equal sign is going to say equal to. A single equal sign is assigning a value to something. All right. We have our augmented assignment operators. So if I say spam equals spam plus 1, I can write that shorthand by saying spam plus equals 1. The key here is remembering that the symbol goes on the left. Some students will do spam equals plus 1. That's not the same thing. All right. It'll actually cause some issues if you do it that way. It's always plus equals or minus equals or asterisk equals, etc. All right. You can use those augment operations on not just numbers, but you could also use it with strings. So if I wanted to add a world to the end of this string, I could say spam plus world, or I could say spam plus equals world. Get the same result. The in and not in operators, all this does is a check to see if it exists inside some keys or inside a list, something like that. All right. We talked about flow control. So flow control, lines of Python code grouped together are called blocks. All right. Inside that block, we know when it begins and where it ends based on how it's indented inside of the Python code. All right. As blocks begin, the indentation increases. Blocks contain other blocks. None of that's a big deal. What you really need to know about flow control is if, elif, and else loops, or in this case, strings. You have while loops, for loops. You have a break keyword, which will get you out of which one of these? All of them, right? A break and a continue will get you and do and function in all of these. All right. Which one of these is implicit that you don't have to specify it? Break or continue? Continue, right? Typically, we associate break and continue with while loops. All right. But you can use them inside a for loop to break out of a for loop, something like that. All right. So we have our if, elifs, and else. An if always starts with the word if. All right. Then we give it some condition. So 1 equals 1. If 1 equals 1, that is true. We would execute the code right below it. If it's not, it moves on to the next chunk. Elif statements, are those required? No, right? We don't have to have elif statements. The reason we would use elifs as opposed to just starting if all over again is if we wanted them to be checked in this particular sequence. So we're going to check this first. If it doesn't match that, check this, then check this, then check this. If we use an entirely different if statement, then we can't use an else that would be a condition across all of those. Right? We would end up with 2 different else statements at that point. All right. Which brings us to the else statement. Is an else statement required? No, it's not required. It's not required in an if or an elif sequence, right? You can give it if you want it to have the catch-all else, but you do not have to have something there. Well, there is no condition for this. It's just else with a colon, and that's going to catch every other case that could be matched. All right. We talked about while loops. So while loops require a condition. Typically, we say something like while true, but it could be while 4 is greater than 5, which means it would go what? On forever, right? No, right? It's like you said, it would never execute, right? 4 is not greater than 5. The trick. All right. You gotta make sure you guys aren't falling asleep. We typically use our break and continue statements inside a while loop, and a while loop will typically go indefinitely until that condition evaluates to false, or we give it the break command. All right. A for loop. We use a for loop when we want to go through something a finite number of times. That's the difference between a for loop and a while loop, right? A for loop means that we have a finite number of times. If we have 6 items inside of our list, that for loop is going to execute how many times? 6 times, right? It's a finite number of times because we're asking it to loop through a list. So we say for something, their variable name, in whatever we're going through, could be a range function, a list, a dictionary, a string, whatever it is. Then we say colon, and then we go ahead and execute that code. So if I have a list with all of our names in it, and I say for name in whatever the name of that list is, it will loop through each one of our names in that list. All right. A while loop is equivalent with a for loop. So you can use a while loop to do the same thing as a for loop. This would be something like x equals 5. While x is less than 5, do this. And at the moment it reaches 5, it would stop executing, right? We would have to self-increment it every single time. For loops are just way more concise and easier to use if you're wanting to loop through a finite number of times. All right. Did I lose everybody on loops? Good thing is it's recorded and you got access to a PowerPoint. All right. Functions. Functions themselves are like mini programs within programs. Functions are often used to avoid duplicating code. They consist of us saying the def statement followed by a colon, and then we can pass arguments to it in order to do different functions inside there, right? So a return statement allows you to specify what value we'll be giving back. Sometimes we use a print statement, but a return just returns that value back to the user. So if we have this function here called example, right? This one has two required keywords. We have start, stop, and then by default, low equals none. We don't have to specify anything that. By default, it's set to none. And high is equal to 1,000. But we must pass in start and stop in order for this function to be called. Everybody see how and why that is? Okay. The high and low statements are considered keyword arguments, and they can be specified directly. So if we say something like this, 2, 10, 2 becomes start, 10 becomes stop, low is equal to none by default, high is equal to 1,000. If I say 10, 2, which this is an error, start would be 10, stop would be 2, low would be none, high is now equal to 500, not 1,000.
I guess, why do you have start and stop?
Because that is the value that is assigned here. So if I pass in 10, 2, the keyword start inside of my function is equal to whatever I set in that first one. Yep. Now, again, these two are required because they don't have the equal sign. So if I say 2, low equals 5, it's going to throw an error because I didn't give a stop value. And these are in the order of whatever I passed them in here. Make sense? All right, scopes. Real quick, all you have to know on scopes is if it's in the outside of the code, it is a global or local? Global, right? If I am inside of a function, a variable is considered a local. If I want to access a global scope variable inside my function, I have to use the global statement, right? Which is what you guys were starting to get there. So we have to use what's called the global statement. We would say global, whatever is inside, right? So we would say, let me get back here. So know this global statement. This is the one that most people screw up on the exam too, all right? If I have this outside variable called eggs, right? And I want to modify that inside my function, I have to call global eggs. I say now this, then when I print it out down here, I'm going to end up with now this. So this variable is globally this. I call spam, call this function. It modifies the global variable eggs to be now this, and then I print eggs. It's now going to have this output. Does everybody get that? If you want to modify a global variable, you have to use the global, and you have to give me what variable you want to import. Yeah.
What's the point of the eggs?
So this is the original variable, right? This doesn't matter. This whole thing doesn't matter till I call it, right? So when we first start this program, eggs is now equal to globally this. I called this function, which changed that to where eggs is now equal to now this. Then when I print it out, we're going to get now this. Had I called that print in between these two, it would have said globally this. That makes sense?
So spam is only defined in that function, it's not globally defined, like find spam, global eggs.
Yeah, def spam is just defining this function called spam.
And it's only that. It's not globally, it's not like.
It's just a function that we call. At any point we call it, that code up here will execute. In this case, we're going to be changing this global variable called eggs.
So if you called it in another part of the program, would it call that, or would
It would still call this. The key here is if I took this part out, right, and didn't say globally eggs, and I just said eggs is now equal to this, it does not change this one here. Inside this function, eggs is now local. It will just modify what's inside this function. Once this thing is done executing, it will automatically go back to globally this, right? The key here is when you want to modify it in the global scape, you have to use global eggs. And you can't just tell me global, you have to give me the variable name. Hint, hint, wink, wink. You have to say global. You have to tell me the variable name. All right. For functions and exception handling, we use try and accept statements. So remember, you can try to do something. If it doesn't work, have an accept statement so that it doesn't give you a bunch of red text and an error, right? Okay. Anybody have any questions on that content? All right, we're in the home stretch now. So for floats, or I'm sorry, for the built-in functions that are inside of Python that we've all used. So we have string, which will convert anything over to a string. We have int, which will convert it over to an integer, and float will convert it to a float. All right. We have the string function, which will convert. These are just examples of those, float and integer. We have our print function that we used, right? This will display whatever's inside of there going out. Note that if we want to print a blank line, we just say print, right? How does this work? Does anybody know why this works? So when we just call print, how do we get a blank line? Yeah.
There's automatic.
There you go. So there is a keyword argument for print that is said end equals new line character. That's the reason it prints a new line there. If we change that and we say print, and then inside there we say end equals 5 Ds, then every time we print whatever's inside of there, it's going to put 4 Ds and that's it. All right. So the reason it prints a new line character is there is a keyword argument by default that is end, and that is set to a new line character. Okay. So for example, here's what that looks like. By default, you have that new line character. We also have the option called sep, which would give us a separator. So if I say dogs, cats, ends with 3 colons, this is what we get printed out. Cats, space, dogs, and then 3 colons. If I said the separator was 3 dots, it would say cats, 3 dots, dogs, 3 dogs, mice. Everybody see how that works? Print has 2 different options. It has end and separate. By default, separate is a white space character, just the space. End is set to a new line character. All right, so here's some print examples. I have a variable called spam equal to world. I say print hello plus spam. This here is called what? Where I take one string. Concatenation. Great. All right. If we want to just print a variable, we could say spam equals 467, print spam. It prints out 467. All right. We use the input function when we want to collect information from a user. When we collect it, it's always what data type? Strings, right? No matter what, it's always a string. When you want to assign that to a variable or gather that input from a user, you have to give it a value or a variable name equals input, and then it will store it into that variable name. All right, so here's some examples. I print a question of how old are you? We store age, my age equals to an input, and it will prompt. Note inside these parentheses of input, if you want the question to be inline, you can put the question here as opposed to before it with a print statement. Make sense? Just a preference as to how you want it to be displayed to your user. Okay, we have the len function. We can use the len function to calculate the number of characters inside of a string. We could use the len function to calculate the number of items inside of a list. All right, len, you pass it a list. String, you pass in a string inside the len function. We have the type function, which will allow you to determine what is the data type of a particular thing inside Python. So it would return string, list, tuple, whatever it may be when you pass it in. We have the list function. This is to convert whatever we got to a list. So we may use this on like a tuple or a string to convert it to a list. We may also use that like on what? Where else would we use the list function? On dictionaries, when we call for like dot keys, right? That returns something that looks like a list, but it's not a true list. Therefore, we can't do things like add things to it or do any of that kind of stuff, right? We'd have to convert it to a true list. This is one where people mess up on the exam as well. All right. So if I have this tuple, which is called cat dog 5, right? I need to pass that inside the function of list, and that will return me this list. All right. So if I say, given the following variable hello, or the following string hello, how would I convert that into a list? And you would put that string inside this list here. That makes sense? Everybody see how that works? Again, this is the one people mess up on the exam. So if I say, here's a tuple, cat dog 5, you need to pass it inside the list. And so this is what you would have to give me for an answer. Okay. The tuple function is basically the same thing, just different, right? So if I had a list of cat dog 5, I would put my list inside the tuple function in order to convert that over to a tuple. Anybody got any questions on those? Those are the main ones most people miss on the quiz or on the exam. All right, this last part, I can tell you right now, there's not a whole lot of it on the exam, so I'm just going to kind of glaze over it. Hopefully you guys watch the video. If you didn't watch the video, absolutely go watch that video. Otherwise, you're going to struggle with regex this semester. All right. So regex allows you to find a specific pattern of text. Think of it like Control F on your keyboard when you're going to search through something inside of a website or a browser, something like that. See, a question popped up. Skip the range. Yes, I did skip that. Sorry about that. There you go. The range function slide, we kind of covered it earlier in the for loop. Remember, the first one is our start, the second one is our step, and the third one is our start, stop, and step. So if I ask you which one of these arguments is the stepping argument, it would be the third variable, right? So if I gave you something like this, let's pop this up here real quick. Range. Which one of those is start? 2, right? Which one's the stepping? Well, that was a horrible example. Let's try that again. 7. All right. So if I give you something like this on the exam and I ask which one is the stop, it is 10. All right. Great question. Sorry about that online. That was actually a key slide because most people messed that one up too. All right. Real quick on the regex. So regex, again, allows us to do a search through a particular string to see if we can find a match for what we're looking for. To do that, we have to import regex. When we use that with import RE, all right, we then use re.compile to use a raw string for what we want to search for. We can use .search to search through it, and we use the group method to find out whether or not we got a result. So something like that would look like this, right? If we wanted a phone number regex, we would compile this, which is specifically looking for 3 digits inside of a parenthesis, a dash, 3 digits, then 4 digits, and that would return us a phone number. So that's going to match on this 415-555-4242. Therefore, it would return that mo.1 group is going to be 415 because this is a grouping. This one here is going to be looking for the second group, which is the back part, and we can assign that out. All right. We can use a pipe symbol. Pipe symbol is going to look for either or. It's whichever one's found first. So if I say Batman, Tina Fey, and I tell it to search through this string, it's going to return me Batman because Batman was found first inside this string. All right. You can use the find all. Search is going to return the first thing it finds. Right? Just like when you guys hit Control F, you say, give me Batman. It shows up Batman, the first thing that found. If I use find all, it's going to find me all the Batmans inside my article or whatever I'm searching through. Okay. Sub will allow you to substitute, and you guys will need to know this for homework 4. So when you go back and watch the video, know how to do substitute.
This is the video for Tuesday.
The video for Tuesday while you guys are at the conference. Yep. All right. There's very complex regexes, something that looks like this. This allows us to do very specific groupings and things in that. All right. We're not going to dive super deep into regex in this class. It's probably the most complicated thing when you're doing programming languages. Doesn't matter which language you're in, they all have regexes. It's always the most complicated thing there is. What do you guys need to know? Go to regex 101, pick the language you're typing in, and use that as a way to test. It's the easiest way to do that. Okay, regex character classes. You just need to know a lowercase d is going to look for a numeric digit. An uppercase D is going to look for anything that is not an uppercase or a digit. All right. W is going to look for white space characters, etc. Know these little tables and stuff like that, but there shouldn't be too many questions on this for the exam. All right. Last couple pieces here. All right. So we talked about a couple different modules that we used in this class. We use the import keyword in order to import a module into Python that's not built in. For example, we would use something like random. We would say import random. That allows us to use a couple different functions we learned, like random.int. What does that give us? A randint gives us a random integer based on two values that we pass it, right? So in this case, it's the starting one and the stopping one. Does it include the stopping one? Yes. So if I say 1, 5, it'll give me a random number between 1 and 5, including 5, right? We talked about the sys module. We use import sys. We do this to use the sys.exit function. This allows us to close our program when we want to do it. So we don't have to wait till the end of the program. We're somewhere in the middle. Something happened. We want to end the program now. We use sys.exit. Okay. We talked about the copy module. This allows us to make a copy of a list or a dictionary. So we say import copy, we say copy.copy, it will make a copy of it. We do this because of references. If you guys don't remember that, go back and watch the video. If we are making a copy of a list that contains lists, we want to make sure we use deep copy. That makes sure that all of that is preserved. All right. We talked about the pretty print module. Anybody remember what we use the pretty print module with? Primarily? Dictionaries, right? The idea is that it will print it nice and clean so we can read it. So to use it, we import pretty print. And then from there, we would use pretty print the same way you would use the print function before with lists. P format is going to allow it to return as a string value so you can kind of tweak it and print it out in a little bit better format. Let's see here, Keisha. Yep, thank you for bringing that up, Keisha, because that range one was an important one. Let's see here. Paperclip. You guys remember Paperclip? This is allowing us to use the clipboard on the operating system. So if we want to copy something from the clipboard or if we want to paste something to the clipboard, we have to use Paperclip. Notice Paperclip does not come with Python. We have to pip install it. So you go out to the command line, pip install Paperclip, then you can use it. The last one that you guys learned was RE, which is regex, right? So if we want to use regex, we have to import RE. From there, we used re.compile, and then we set up our regular expressions. Again, if you haven't watched that video from what would have been Tuesday, make sure you go watch that video. All right. Last but not least, we talked about references. That's not super important. References into functions. And comments. We did talk about that. So comments are used to write notes or explain your code. You can comment out your code if you want to temporarily remove it from your program without having to delete it out, right? You just comment it out. Python won't execute it. You can use a line comment, which is a hashtag, right? Anything after that hashtag is ignored by Python. So this is the example of a line comment. We always use those three at the top of our homework assignments to say who your name is, what class you're in, what homework assignment is, right? If you're going to have a block of comments, for example, you're explaining what your midterm project is, you would use a block of triple quotes, right? So triple double quotes. You got your double quotes. You're going to give me 3 of them. Give me all the blocks of text, whatever you want to give me, then 3 double quotes back at the bottom. Very useful for documentation. Or if you've got this massive chunk of code and you don't want to add a hashtag to the front of every single line, you just throw 3 double quotes above it, 3 double quotes below it. The whole thing gets commented out. we'll talk about that part more on the midterm project, which will be next week. We'll talk about that. Anybody got any questions on the midterm exam?
This one is due Sunday.
Sunday night at midnight. If you guys are on travel this weekend, you can have an extra day too. Okay. Same way with you guys online. It's in theory due Sunday night at midnight. If you need a couple extra days for time, I'm not worried about that. All right. Take it when you're ready and you feel prepared for it. Watch the PowerPoint video, go back this recording. Make sure that you kind of organize this PowerPoint the way you want. Add yourself some extra notes, things you can refer back to. I don't care if you use the PowerPoint when you take the exam. All right, that's fine. Just know you only have about an hour to complete 20 questions. Once you go through one question, you can't go back to it. Just take your time going through it.
Yes, do we need to
Try not to overthink questions.
fill out the, if we have the exhibit signed, fill out the form.
Yeah, if you had an extended form, I think most of you have already sent those to me at the beginning of the semester. I just have to go back through here and add it. So if you start the exam and for whatever reason it doesn't have your extended time, if you guys sent me one of those letters, just email me and I will make sure I get that added to that.
I don't remember if the. Cause I know for like quiet testing, you have to fill out a
Right.
form for that. I don't know if there's a same form for extended time.
All right. Anybody else have any questions on the recording? All right, I'm gonna stop the recording then.